Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Gray Wolf, Gray Sea, aboard the German submarine U-124 in World War II, by E.B. Gasaway, narrated by David Vries. This narrative is based on documents from the United States Navy, United States Coast Guard, the German Navy, and published works in the United States, England, and Germany. Many details were drawn from correspondence and interviews with the men involved, a number of whom I met in Germany several years ago. The language used in conversations is that used variously in the United States Navy and Merchant Marine, Royal Navy and British Merchant Marine, and German Navy and Merchant Marine. The U-124 was the third most successful submarine of all the hundreds, Axis and Allied, which fought in World War II. In her short life, she sank 49 ships, for a total of 226,946 tons. Chapter 1. It was April 2, 1943, and at last, Commander Rodney Thompson of the Royal Navy reflected the war news had taken a definitely brighter turn. The German thrust deep into Russia had dissolved into the debacle at Stalingrad, and in North Africa, American and British forces had the Desert Fox Rommel between them. The German army that had seemed so nearly invincible was suffering major setbacks, and the land war on all fronts now looked hopeful. But at sea, he knew, U-boats still prowled and struck and killed. Commander Thompson stared anxiously into the blackness that surrounded his ship, the HMS Black Swan. It was a clear night, but quite dark, and he could not see any of the merchant ships that lumbered along in ragged rows behind him. A feeling of great anxiety mingled with helplessness hung over the convoy. The sense of lurking menace was so strong that it was almost a tangible thing. The two freighters, Gogra and Kata, had been sunk since midnight, and the U-boat that had torpedoed them was still somewhere out there. Thompson knew he was waiting in the dark for another chance to attack. Black Swan swept on in wide zigzags ahead of the convoy as the 20-odd merchantmen behind her struggled to keep station in the dark. Convoy OS-45, now even with the Portuguese coast, had covered roughly a quarter of its long voyage from England to Freetown. As always, the U-boat command would have known the approximate size and position of the convoy, and would have ordered a scouting line of U-boats to intercept. At least one boat had already found them. Thompson knew that other sleek gray hulls would be silently converging on them as the wolf pack gathered. Strange how long a man could fight these predators without ever getting a glimpse of one. A U-boat could leave a convoy riddled with sinking and burning ships, and not once be actually seen. Survivors of sunk ships saw them sometimes. Thompson remembered stories about surfaced U-boats with odd emblems painted on their scarred conning towers, a playful dolphin, red devils, a fox's mask, and one with a flower, the Edelweiss. He glanced impatiently at his watch. Not too much longer until dawn. "Radar reports a stray echo, sir." Thompson was instantly all attention. "Give me the range and bearing." The answer came back immediately. The radar operator was able seaman D. Hudson, clear-headed and competent. He had plotted the position of the convoy ships, and this contact now was ahead and to starboard. Hudson had recognized it for what it was, a surfaced U-boat. "Hard starboard," called Thompson, and braced himself as the sloop heeled over sharply to take the turn. Her engines hummed with a higher pitch, and her hull shuddered with the increased vibrations as Black Swan headed toward the stray echo on a closing bearing. Her sharp prow sliced through the black water, which foamed up in white and sparkling bow waves on either side, and her curving wake trailed out behind her. HMS Black Swan was the first of the Black Swan class of anti-submarine sloops, a tough and fast 2,000-tonner designed specifically for ocean escort duty. She was fitted with the latest in radar gear, eyes that could penetrate the blackest night to see a U-boat riding low on the surface. Black Swan also carried a formidable array of guns, including 6.4-inch high-angle, low-angle guns in twin mountings. There were 2 of these forward and 1 aft, and they had radar incorporated at their aft control. She also carried a number of Oerlikon and Bofors guns, as well as other anti-submarine weapons. She was designed and built for just one purpose: to kill U-boats. Making her best speed of about 20.5 knots, Black Swan passed close ahead of the starboard wing ship, which had loomed up suddenly in the dark. And with every man ready at his post and every eye straining to penetrate the inky darkness, Black Swan raced toward the ominous echo. The minutes dragged by. Perhaps the U-boat had already spotted them. Low in the water, she would have a ship in sight long before she was herself seen, unless the ship, like Black Swan, carried radar to see through the dark, and for distances far beyond the sharpest U-boat lookout's capabilities. Thompson wondered what kind of hand the U-boat skipper was playing. It was highly possible, if not likely, that he had already seen the sloop bearing down on him. Then why had he not sheered off his own course to get out of the way? Was the U-boat, after all, holding the trump card? Thompson frowned. It was not comforting to think that his opposite number's glasses might be trained on him now, and a German fist poised over a torpedo firing button. Perhaps the U-boat skipper was merely holding his own course, expecting the sloop to turn off. He was almost into the convoy, and in the most favorable attacking position possible. Running in front of the convoy, Thompson had been patrolling in wide zigzags. If the German did not know he had radar, he would have no reason to suspect that he was not on a leg of his regular search pattern. If this were the case, he would expect the sloop to turn away before reaching the U-boat. The U-boat must surely have seen him by now. They had to be close, and he was still on the surface. Whatever else her stepper might be, he was cool and determined, and only Black Swan stood between him and the convoy. "Radar says he's lost contact, sir." Thompson nodded briefly at the report. "Very well," he said. "The U-boat might be lost in the clutter, or he might have dived. If the latter were the case, they should soon pick him up on ASDIC. ASDIC is an underwater echo-ranging device called sonar in the U.S. "Tell Hudson to keep watching," he said unnecessarily, knowing the radar operator did not have to be told to do his best. "There!" the lookout above him yelled. "Just off the starboard bow. U-boat diving." Thompson could see the conning tower as it submerged, and he watched as it passed directly in front of the sloop, underwater but still visible some 20 meters ahead. "Put depth charges on shallow setting," he shouted. There was not time to make a planned attack, but the advantage of surprise was on his side. Even if none of the depth charges hit the boat, they might be close enough to shake him up a bit and make it harder for him to evade the next attack. The water was still boiling with exploding depth charges as Black Swan turned to make another run. The 2 ASDIC operators, Lieutenant W.A. Fuller and able seaman C. Rushton, reported a contact. Calling out the range and bearing at steady intervals, they guided the sloop precisely to where the U-boat was still desperately plunging downward. When the explosions had died away, Fuller reported that he had lost contact. They were now in danger of colliding with the merchant ships, and Thompson called for a change of course. The corvette Stonecrop was arriving on the scene, and she would finish the attack. Black Swan's place was now back in her position at the head of the convoy. They could not afford to leave the front unguarded for long. Coming in at full speed, the Stonecrop, commanded by Captain Patrick Smythe, dropped a pattern of depth charges over the estimated position of the U-boat. When the corvette turned to make another attack, her ASDIC operator reported that he was unable to make contact. As Stonecrop slowly recrossed the area, now quiet after the violence of the exploding depth charges, a shout from a lookout electrified the men on the bridge. Oil slick ahead!" The corvette moved slowly through the large and spreading patch of diesel oil, carefully searching for proof of a kill, while her Aztec probed in vain for a contact. Only the oil was to be found, the lifeblood of a U-boat, now spreading slowly over the surface of her last battlefield. At last, Stonecrop turned and sped away. This battle was over, and now her duties lay with the slow and vulnerable cargo ships which must be protected. Smythe knew other gray wolves were lying in wait for his charges, and he swung his tough little ship back into her station. Toward the east, the first rosy light was breaking through the darkness. Soon the sun would turn the leaden sea to sparkling blue and green and pick up rainbows in the dull patch of oil. Chapter 2. On November 25, 1942, a dark gray U-boat slipped her moorings at a pier assigned to the 2nd U Flotilla in Lorient and turned her prow toward the ocean. A few German Navy men stood in the late fall chill to watch as she swung confidently away from the French shore, her own special insignia, the Edelweiss, gleaming dully on her conning tower. This was the U-124, veteran of 10 hard war cruises all over the bloody Atlantic. She had come home bearing the scars of savage fights, visible on her gray hull and invisible on the minds and souls of her men. But along with the scars, some of which would always remain, she had worn the little flags representing ships she had sunk: red for warship, white for freighter, and white with red border for tanker, which told her victories to those watching on the quay when she returned. Now she was going back to the scene of some of her most devastating raids, the Western Atlantic. "Gray wolves on a gray sea," a phrase from the U-boat song blaring over the boat's record player, seemed especially appropriate. A thorough overhauling had put her in first-rate condition, and she ran like new, purring smoothly through the heavy Biscay waves. Caution ruled the day as she passed through these waters, so heavily patrolled by British aircraft and anti-submarine vessels that the area was known as Totenallée, Death Row. The long shore leave had been as beneficial to her men as it had been to the boat, and the intolerable strain of hard months of desperate fighting was gone. Now they felt only the excitement and familiar tightening of nerves that accompanied going back into action, and it was a good feeling. U-124 was under the command of Kapitanleutnant Jochen Mohr. It was his 7th war cruise on this boat, his 4th as commander. To his crew, there was always a special feeling about going on a war cruise with Mohr. An exceptional leader, he had the subtle intuition and infallibly sure touch they called Fingerspitzengefühl. His wit and easy-going manner, his boyish charm and ringing laughter were irresistible to the men who served under him, and who felt that he could not make a mistake. As one young crewman wrote to his mother when she complained about his having to make yet another war cruise, "You must not worry. Always we will sail with our Mohr. Unser Mohr. Our Mohr." Besides Mohr, there were other men who had cast their lots and their lives with this boat for 1 or 2 or more war cruises. Some were still on board, some had left to tread other decks. U-124 had echoed their footsteps, laughter, jokes, prayers, and curses during the weeks and months when this steel hull was their only shelter from the dangers of the ocean and the enemy, and the shipmates who shared this boat were their only friends. The always present danger made the closeness of friends more precious, and moments of pleasure and triumph sharper and more intensely felt. Their camaraderie was real and strong, but for each of them there were moments of darkness when fear was an overpowering force against which he must struggle alone. For every man who served on this boat, there were ties which he would always feel, and each of them left something of his own spirit to remain with the boat always. With each new patrol, there had been changes in personnel. for it was customary to take some of the men who had had battle experience to go on the new boats. The commanders always fought to hang on to their men who had worked up well, and had to be literally forced into giving them up. But with this practice, there was always a sprinkling of veterans in the crews of the new boats, and their replacements learned quickly among shipmates who were already battle-wise. The custom also served to make the small U-boat service even more closely knit, and it seemed that every man knew at least someone on every boat. They went on liberty together in the U-boat base towns along the Bay of Biscay, and they listened in on each other's wireless signals at sea. News of the other boats was discussed in wardrooms and messes at sea in much the same manner that a family might discuss the goings-on of its relatives. They were, in truth, a band of brothers. U-124, unlike most other boats, had inherited most of her original crew as a unit, and their adventures on board the ill-fated U-64 had been told and retold in wardroom and crew's messes until they had become a very part of the U-124 herself. The story began on December 15, 1939, when the U-64 was turned over to her commander and crew by Deschimag shipyards in Bremen and taken to the naval base at Kiel for her shakedown cruise in the Baltic. Bad weather soon forced them to break off exercises, and for weeks the boat lay frozen to her pier by the Blücher Bridge in Kiel. In early March, the boat moved to Wilhelmshaven to await orders to the front. The crew now had frequent opportunities to talk to U-boat men returning from war cruises and to learn their experiences and impressions. Some were encouraging to the U-64's untried crew, and some were shocking. They began to realize, perhaps for the first time, that what was going on out there in the Atlantic was a cold and relentless war. While they waited, the crew spent their off-duty hours drinking beer and talking about what lay ahead of them. They were young and keen, and their morale was high. They were proud of their boat and their service, and they were eager to fight. They began to learn that the easy-going and relaxed atmosphere of a U-boat, as compared with other warships, was not a lack of discipline, but rather an inner discipline, as opposed to strict rules arbitrarily laid down and followed blindly. In the small, tight community of a U-boat, every man aboard was a key man, and on each one depended the safety and success of them all. This huge awareness of his own importance, plus the well-developed sense of humor that made the dangers and discomforts of his life bearable, was the hallmark of the U-boat man. The boat had been on alert for sea duty for days, so that when her sailing orders finally came, it was almost an anticlimax. Her commander had been given 3 sets of orders. First, to escort the raider Orion under the command of Fregattenkapitän Kurt Weyer out past the northern coast of Scotland and into the open Atlantic. Second, to sink enemy shipping in the Atlantic. And the third were sealed orders, to be opened on receipt of the code word Hartmut. "Both diesels, ahead slow," the commander called from the bridge. He was answered by the clang of the engine-room telegraph as his order was repeated below. "Take over the watch," he said to the Erster Wachoffizier, Hein Hirsacker. Erster Wachoffizier is first watch officer or executive officer. When you reach the second buoy, come to half speed and course 330 degrees. "Aye. At the second buoy, come to half speed and course 330 degrees. The commander nodded and went below. "Hey, boatsman!" Hirsacker called down to Leo Rautzis on the deck below him. Boatsman is bosun petty officer. "Is the upper deck clear to dive?" "As soon as I tighten these gratings, sir." The boat plowed smoothly through the gentle swells. "See," Hirsacker remarked, "our little steamer lies in the water like a battleship." "Upper deck clear to dive, sir," reported Rautzis, climbing onto the bridge. "Good. Say, boatsman, that was a pretty tired farewell back at the pier, wasn't it? I've seen jollier funerals." They both laughed. "Well, let's hope we don't get our feet wet," Hirsacker said. "Second buoy, 10 degrees to starboard," the lookout interrupted. "Good. Both engines half ahead. come to course 330 degrees. Both engines half ahead, come to course 330 degrees, a voice below him echoed, followed by the shrill engine room telegraph and the acknowledgment that his orders had been carried out. Then he called the commander on the speaking tube. "Bridge here. First watch officer reporting the watch set and ready for action. Second buoy on starboard, course 330 degrees, both engines half." "Thank you," the commander replied. Then he called to Kurt Oehring in the radio room across from his own cabin. "Hi, any signals for us?" "No, Herr Kaloi," Oehring answered, using the abbreviation for his commander's rank, Kapitanleutnant. "Very well. See if you can get us some music." U-64 was under the command of Kapitanleutnant Wilhelm Georg Schultz, a gifted officer who possessed a wealth of seagoing experience, in addition to the most thorough training the German Kriegsmarine could provide. He had first gone to sea at the age of 17 as an ordinary seaman on a small merchant ship powered by sails alone, lacking auxiliary engines and even wireless. His first voyage took him to Australia and the South Seas by way of the stormy Cape Horn, and had lasted a year and a half. He had seen most of the world and earned his master's papers by the time he came to Uncle Erich's steamer company, Erich Raeder, Commander-in-Chief of the Kriegsmarine, from a berth as fourth officer on the luxury ship Oceana of the Hamburg-Amerika line. For generations, the men in his family had been army officers. His father had been an artillery major, and his brother Heinrich was a general staff officer. Serving his country came naturally and easily to him, and so did the decisions and responsibilities of command. To outsiders, he often appeared cool and somewhat unapproachable, an officer cast in the rigid mold of Prussian discipline and bound by the highest ideals and standards of the German officer class. His crew, however, had soon discovered for themselves that he was a man who understood them completely and who was genuinely concerned about them. Every sailor on board knew with certainty that he could go to his commander at any time with his problems, personal or otherwise, and knowing this gave them confidence. He set high standards for himself and for them, and his boat was tight and well run. He seemed rather like a father to the 19- and 20-year-olds, whose first awe of him had quickly turned to open admiration and absolute trust. They nicknamed him Willem, a fact they discreetly kept from him. On April 9, U-64 and her charge Orion, which was disguised as an ordinary freighter, were still in the North Sea in the vicinity of Edinburgh, when a wireless message arrived from U-boat headquarters addressed to U. Schultz. It contained the single word, Hartmut. Schultz opened his sealed orders, and then called his crew together to tell them that their destination was Norway, to protect the fjords at Narvik. The invasion of Norway had begun. Bidding farewell and good hunting to the Orion, U-64 turned her bow toward Norway and the icy waters that would be her grave. After a couple of days' hard steaming, U-64 had entered West Fjord on the way to Narvik. The German ships were already in position and had landed their troops. The city of Narvik was in German hands, but British battleships, cruisers, and destroyers had arrived also, and they now occupied the outer positions, bottling up the German ships in the fjords. U-64 crept cautiously into West Fjord in daylight and on the surface. "Ship bearing 25 degrees, a lookout called. The commander briefly searched the position. "Ah, there she is, destroyer. We'd better head for the cellar. Now, what's she steering?" he asked himself. 85 degrees, fine. Then he called, "Clear the bridge! Make ready to dive!" A shout came from below him in the conning tower as Willy Klein echoed, "Make ready to dive!" The order was repeated in the control room as the bridge watch skidded down the steel ladder from the bridge. The commander followed, slamming and dogging down the hatch above him. "Hatch is closed! Dive!" he called. "Dive," the LI repeated. LI, or Leitender Ingenieur, Chief Engineering Officer. The word losing itself in the rush of water pouring into the diving tanks as well-trained hands flew swiftly and surely among the maze of valves and levers. The throbbing diesels were shut off and replaced by 2 electric motors that drove the boat under. The chief engineering officer was an enormous, easy-going Bavarian, Oberleutnant zur See Ingenieur Steinmetz. A popular man, he was a walking example of Gemütlichkeit, the special warmth, gaiety, and friendliness his home is famous for. "Come to periscope depth," Schultz said quietly, shouts no longer needed, above the softer hum of the electric motors. "Bring her to 10 degrees, Klein. Steering 10 degrees. Boat is at 14 meters, periscope clear," Steinmetz reported. "Both ahead slow," Schultz ordered, and was answered by the clang of the engine-room telegraph. "Man, cut out that racket," he snapped as he pressed his eyes to the periscope. The boat began her approach, Schultz taking quick and wary looks through the periscope at intervals. Finally, he established her identity. "She's British. Make ready tubes 1 and 2. Word flashed through the boat, and the crew exchanged confident grins. Their first target, their first victim, rather, and a destroyer at that. "Tubes 1 and 2, ready." Schultz squinted through the scope. "Li, can't you hold the boat steadier?" "It's damned difficult, Herr Kaloi," Steinmetz replied. "The seaway is too strong. It rolls her under." He spoke brief orders to the plainsmen sitting in front of him, his eyes fixed on the array of gauges and dials over their heads. "Both dead slow," the commander said. "I can't hold the boat dead slow," Steinmetz told him. "Try," Schultz replied, unperturbed. Then he cried out excitedly, "Damn! If she stays on her course, she'll come right in front of our tubes. Enemy speed, 20 knots, course, 115 degrees, own course, 0 degrees, distance, 800, 700, 500. Tubes 1 and 2. There was a quick, breathless silence in the boat as they waited for the "Torpedo los!" that would fire the torpedo. "Li, take her down!" the commander shouted. "Both engines ahead full. Hard port, close outer doors." The crew knew they had been seen, and knew further that if they hoped to escape, they must get deep and get there fast. The relief they felt as the boat began plunging downward was short-lived, however, for as suddenly as she had started down, she twisted violently and broached the surface. Steinmetz checked his instruments frantically and found the answer right before him. When the order was given to submerge, someone had blown the port diving tank instead of flooding it. It took the Li only seconds to flood it, and U-64 had obediently settled down to 80 meters by the time the destroyer roared overhead. The depth charges were wide, but the boat quivered with shock waves, and they sounded like doom to those who were hearing them for the first time. Willi Klein turned around wide-eyed. "Did you hear that, Sherry?" he whispered, using the familiar nickname that had been hung on Karl Kesselheim by a harried drill instructor who got tired of trying to distinguish among 3 Karls in one squad. "Hear what?" Kesselheim asked innocently. "The bombs!" "No." "Ass!" U-64 soon lost the destroyer, and her elated crew congratulated themselves. They had shaken off their first destroyer and had done it easily, even in these narrow fjord waters. The famous British Aztec that was supposed to end submarine warfare had not quite lived up to its claims, they thought smugly. Their commander was neither elated nor smug. He had almost lost his boat, simply because of a stupid mistake on the part of one of his own crew, and he was furious. There was no time to dwell on past mistakes, but his young green crew would have to learn, and learn fast. They were running on the surface in British-held waters, and their batteries were perilously low. He got off a hurried report to headquarters. "Strong destroyer guard stands before the fjord. Narvik threatens to be a trap." At the end of West Fjord, they could see 2 cruisers with a screen of 3 destroyers. There was no doubt this time that they were British. "How much juice left in the batteries, L.I.?" Schultz asked. "They're pretty low, sir," was the answer. "Enough to attack, not much to escape on." The commander hesitated.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?